routinely meet with Muslims, especially in like my university years. There were times where every Ramadan, Muslim friends were reading the Quran, and so I would read the Quran alongside them. So we would read the entirety of the Quran during the time of Ramadan, and I would use that as an opportunity both to learn, but also to I wanted to be an example to them. So when you were talking about my attitude in the way that I approached my conversation with Billy, that's been my attitude all along, in that I'm part of an organization that does Christian apologetics.
And yes, this is Wesley Huff, and he absolutely annihilated Billy Carson. Billy Carson actually sued him. On the Patrick Bet-David show, he's talking with Patrick Bet-David after he had a debate with somebody else. If you don't know who those two people are, don't worry about it. This is going to be an excellent conversation about religion, Islam, Christianity. Patrick Bet-David is about to ask Willie Huff a very good, poignant, and tough question. Why is the religion not really thriving? And when you look at Islam, it is. Patrick Bet-David, the PBD podcast, let's get it. Wesley Huff responding.
Apologetics
That's the organization in Toronto you were talking about.
Yeah, right. So it's in Canada, Apologetics Canada. But apologetics is just a word that means to give it a reason or to give a defense. And it comes from a passage in 1 Peter 3:15, which says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." But then it's the last part in that verse that I think is just as important. Not just be prepared to give an answer, but Peter says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks for the reason for the hope that you have. But do so with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ will be ashamed of their slander." And I think when we approach these conversations, whether we're talking to, agnostics, atheists, Mormons, Muslims, for someone like myself who claims to be a Christian, if I'm only giving answers, but I'm not revering Christ as Lord in my heart, and those answers aren't done so with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, then I'm not actually obeying that command in Scripture to give an answer, because it needs to be sandwiched in between those two things.
Yeah, I love that.
That is good, but that is also a weakness. You don't want to be toxic tolerant as well. A lot of times your biggest strength is your biggest weakness. Let's get back to it. Here's the question. Patrick Bet-David on the PBD podcast. This was the most watched moment of one of the most viral moments for Patrick Bet-David.
Let me go a little bit deeper with this. So, question for you. Somebody may say, okay, so the Quran, and the illiterate prophet, Muhammad, right? And, inconsistencies in the book that was written, not like the Bible where you're kind of going through it and it's a Old Testament, New Testament. I kind of feel like, okay, when I'm going through letters or Matthew, Luke, I'm kind of feeling, he's given his testimony, he's given it. Maybe there's a little bit of differences, but for the most part, I can see how their point of view while they're walking with Jesus, they see this. Okay. Why do you think the religion, 610, 632, Common Era, Quran is done, from 632 to today, why do you think it's become the fastest growing religion in the world? And now they have, I don't know what the number is, 1.5 billion, maybe 1.4 billion. I don't know the exact number, but it's somewhere around there, 1.9 billion. Why do you think it's grown exponentially that at this point they're saying in the next 30 years it's going to be the biggest religion in the world? And some even say where 30% of House or Senate in America could be run by Muslims. Why do you think it's grown so big?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an exact prognosis. Islam is a very different religion than something like Christianity in that it has a socio-political component to it that Christianity doesn't, in that it is a political religious system. And it was designed that way from its beginning, in that Muhammad, if once again we're assuming that the traditional Islamic sources are correct, he was a warlord. And so if from its inception there's been a different attitude, Jesus was the crucified Messiah, in that he said, I've come to not be served, but to serve. And so when we see the beginnings of Christianity, we see an attitude where people are motivated by love your neighbor, pray for those who persecute you, love those who hate you, You know, if a Roman soldier asks for your tunic, you give him, you know, your undercoat also. And so there's a different attitude when we look at the substance of something like Christianity, in that Christians were willing to be persecuted and die because they believed that Jesus had already won, that he was sitting at the right hand of the Father. And so their battle cries were pray and pray, evangelize, and be willing to lose your life for this message. Whereas with Islam, there was much more of a system where it was designed to subjugate the entire world under Islam. So you have the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, and then you have the rest of the world. And so I think there's a political component to Islam that is very different than Christianity. I think there's also, especially in the West, we're basically being outbred in that traditional Muslim homes have more kids. I mean, there's also the component of having more wives within majority Muslim countries.
Then there's that.
At least that's allowed. But having more kids. And so you have more kids and you have a system that allows for certain things. And so that's going to grow faster than a society which is dissuading families from growing, is maybe even demonizing the growth of a household for various reasons, whether that be, you know, political or environmental or otherwise.
It does matter. I mean, there are times when Christians don't need to be passive, don't need to be tolerant, need to stand up. And he's missing that part, but this is all great stuff here.
And so you just have very different worldview foundations for something like Christianity than you do for something like Islam.
Excellent explanation there about the differences. I'm not an expert in Islam from the tertiary knowledge I have of it. Absolutely. That's my impression. And why do you think the Middle East looks like it is right now? It's just been ever since beginning of time, ever since BC. Straight up war, nothing but war over there. They have not become anywhere civilized like Western society that could only have been done through Christ. Let's get back to the clip.
The world's a better placed based on one faith or the other, meaning when you're speaking with Muslims, there is a pride for them to, you know, we're going to outgrow you. And
so Patrick Bet-David, what he's coming back with is saying, that's nice and all. I don't need to really argue with that or not. It doesn't matter, because you're going to get conquered, you're going to get dominated, because people are flocking to it. Whether you whatever the reason is, that doesn't answer why people are flocking to it.
We're going to be the dominant religion in the world, and, you know, it's going to be the way we run things. Cities, like right now with what's going on with UK, you know, I don't know if you're following the challenges that UK is going through, where the most common name given, 30%, I think, I don't know what it was, the most common name given to kids in 2024 was Muhammad. And this is UK, right? You're talking about. Do you think Christians, the goal is to what? You know, in your mind, is it, if the faith that we have today, it's the same it was yesterday, it's the same it's going to be 100 years from now, you know, where some criticism may be like, well, look, the Christianity, the church is beginning smaller. Some data that we have, if you want to pull it up, you see this with Pew Research, and they'll show it and say, well, here's what's going on. And, you know, it used to be church attendance used to be higher. I don't know how many mega churches in America are empty today. And I've gone to many of them. And you name them, I've been to a lot of mega churches in America today, because you're going places like, I want to see how this guy preaches. I want to see how that guy preaches. I want to see what this is like. You know, wait a minute, why is this so empty here? Why did we build a facility that's a $50 million facility, but 80% of the place is empty? Why did you build this place? Why do you think on one side, you know, one religion is growing and the other one isn't? Like, this is the number right here, if you look at, right? From 1940, church memberships amongst U.S. adults, 73, 76, 73. So we're around 70% for about 45 years. Then it drops, still at 70% in 2000. But in the last 20 years, 70, 64, 61, 57, 55, 50, 47. And I don't know what that number is today. Why do you think this is happening?
So I think
So this number, if you're just listening, they have a chart here. It says, do you happen to be a member of a church, synagogue, or mosque? And the number is dropping. Yes, if member. And he's about to answer it here, Wesley Huff.
We do need to be careful with the statistics because we used to live in a culture that was much more culturally Christian than it is today. And sometimes I look at these numbers and I often wonder, okay, yes, you see this kind of downward trajectory, but I wonder, I mean, in Canada, in not that long ago, only a few decades ago, you had something like the Lord's Day Act, where you were not allowed to have a business open on Sunday because it was the Lord's Day. And there was just more of a cultural zeitgeist that was not necessarily, I think, Christian it was Christian out of convenience, not Christian out of conviction. And so I think a lot of people used to go to church because maybe they were just following along in the society and that's just part of what you did. And the culture shifted, and now the culture is not saying that going to church is necessarily something that you should do or need to do. And so I'm always curious as to how many of these people who used to, fill out the little tick box and say, I'm a Christian, I go to church on Sunday, how many of them were doing so because it was just par for the course for their culture, and the culture shifted and they weren't really necessarily convictionally Christian then, and they were following the stream of the flow of the culture, and the stream of the flow shifted. And so now it's just more culturally accepted to not go to church. And so
this is the end of the clip here. And I'm going to take it towards this, that again, Christians can't, we can't, I'm a Christian myself, if you don't know. We can't allow the idea of tolerance to be applied when it shouldn't be. That's what it should be. It doesn't mean it always be peaceful other than defense. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not okay for your own country to demonize Christians. And that's the situation we have in America. You can't joke about the tiny hats. I don't even say them on this channel. The dreidels, the whatever you want to call them. I don't even mention them on this channel directly. There's no problem doing it with Christians. You can call a Christian whatever name in the book you want to call them. That's unacceptable. And that has to change. It has to be done peacefully. But if we don't, what Patrick Bet-David is saying there, and you watch this whole one, this was called Billy Carson Couldn't Fight Back. Wesley Huff Destroys Fake Bible. Goes on with the title there, Patrick Bet-David, PBD Podcast. If you don't, then Islam is taking over.
The next clip is ready below. Welcome to After Show Carnage.